In a strongly worded appeal to President Hakainde Hichilema, a coalition of opposition leaders in Zambia has raised alarm over what they describe as escalating human rights violations under the current administration. The letter, signed by prominent figures including Given Lubinda, Harry Kalaba, Sean Tembo, Fred Momembe, and others, accuses the ruling United Party for National Development, UPND, of systematically eroding civil liberties and undermining democratic norms. The arrest of Ambassador Emmanuel Mwamba, a former permanent representative to the African Union and presidential hopeful for the Patriotic Front, PF, is cited as a glaring example of political repression. The opposition contends that such actions reflect a broader trend of authoritarianism, where dissent is met with intimidation, arbitrary detention, and the suppression of press freedom. The signatories argue that the UPND government, despite its international image as a promoter of peace and inclusivity, is increasingly adopting tactics that resemble those of autocratic regimes. They claim that political opponents are being abducted and held without due process, and that the rule of law is being replaced by executive overreach. This, they warn, could destabilize the country and threaten national cohesion. Drawing parallels with nations that have descended into civil unrest due to oppressive governance, the opposition leaders urge President Hichilema to reconsider the trajectory of his administration. They remind him that his electoral victory was built on promises of transparency, economic reform, and respect for democratic principles, commitments they say are now being betrayed. The letter also touches on the psychological toll of political persecution, noting that fear and uncertainty are spreading among citizens who once believed in the promise of a new dawn. The opposition frames the current climate as one of betrayal, where the ideals of justice and equality are being sacrificed for political expediency. They emphasize that Zambia's democratic gains are fragile and must be protected through genuine dialogue, institutional accountability, and respect for pluralism. The arrest of Emmanuel Mwamba is portrayed not merely as a legal matter, but as a symbolic act that reveals the government's intolerance for alternative voices. The opposition warns that if such practices continue, Zambia risks losing its reputation as a stable democracy in the region. Beyond the immediate concerns, the letter serves as a broader indictment of the UPND's governance style. The opposition accuses the administration of manipulating state institutions to silence critics and consolidate power. They argue that the judiciary, police, and media are being co-opted to serve partisan interests, thereby weakening the checks and balances essential to democratic governance. The letter calls for an urgent national conversation about the direction of the country, one that includes all stakeholders and prioritizes the rule of law over political loyalty. The opposition leaders assert that their criticism is not driven by personal ambition, but by a commitment to safeguarding Zambia's democratic future. In analyzing the political formations behind this letter, it becomes clear that the opposition is attempting to forge a united front against what they perceive as creeping authoritarianism. Figures like Harry Kalaba and Sean Tembo represent newer political movements that have gained traction by challenging the status quo, while veterans like Given Lubinda and Fred Momembe bring institutional experience and ideological depth. This convergence of diverse political actors suggests a strategic recalibration where ideological differences are set aside in favor of collective resistance. The letter thus functions not only as a critique of the government, but as a manifesto for opposition unity. The inclusion of Faith Musanda's name in some versions of the letter remains unverified, but her past involvement in high-profile financial scandals adds another layer of complexity to the narrative. If she were to align with the opposition, it could signal a broader shift in Zambia's political landscape, where former insiders become vocal critics. However, without concrete evidence of her participation, such speculation remains premature. Ultimately, the open letter reflects a growing sense of urgency among Zambia's opposition leaders. It is a call to action, a plea for democratic renewal, and a warning against the dangers of unchecked power. As the country grapples with economic challenges, social tensions, and regional pressures, the need for inclusive governance and respect for fundamental rights becomes ever more critical. Whether the UPND will heed this warning remains to be seen, but the opposition has made its position clear. Zambia must choose between authoritarian drift and democratic resilience.